Michael Jordan sees a fan get kicked out for cheering too loud. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan wasn't always the icon we know today. His story, which would eventually transcend basketball, began in the small town of Wilmington, North Carolina. From an early age, Jordan was driven, competitive, and determined to prove himself, but it wasn't always clear that he was destined for greatness. Growing up, Jordan faced challenges, especially with the sport he loved. As a young teenager, he was cut from his high school varsity basketball team, a moment that would shape the course of his life. This initial rejection could have broken most kids, but it had the opposite effect on Jordan. Instead of giving up, he spent the next year growing his skills, honing his craft, and getting stronger. His work ethic became his defining characteristic, setting him apart from other players. By his junior year, Jordan had not only made the varsity team but also became its star player. The combination of his athleticism, work ethic, and unrelenting drive began to turn heads. Jordan's competitive nature wasn't just about winning games, it was about pushing himself beyond limits that others believed impossible. When Jordan entered the University of North Carolina in 1981, he was still relatively unknown on the national stage. But that would change quickly. Under coach Dean Smith, Jordan developed his game further, refining his skills and learning to play within a team system. It was here that he began to build a reputation for himself not just as a scorer but as a leader. His freshman year would be one of the most important turning points of his career. In the 1982 NCAA championship game against Georgetown, Jordan hit a game-winning shot with less than 20 seconds left, marking the beginning of his legacy as a clutch performer. It was a moment that would come to define his career, his ability to rise to the occasion when the stakes were highest. Jordan's time at UNC was a pivotal moment in his development. He wasn't the player he would eventually become, but it was here that he learned to perform under pressure and began to develop the confidence that would carry him through his entire career. He won the NCAA title as a freshman, an achievement few had ever accomplished. But even more than that, he began to understand the importance of teamwork and leadership. The foundation for his NBA success was laid during these college years, but the best was yet to come. In 1984, after an outstanding college career, Jordan declared for the NBA draft. Despite his collegiate success, there were still questions about how his game would translate to the professional level. Some doubted whether Jordan's style of play, his focus on individual brilliance, would be enough to succeed in a league dominated by established stars like Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Hakeem Olajuwon. But the Chicago Bulls saw something in Jordan that few others did. With the third overall pick, they selected him, making him their franchise player. Jordan's arrival in Chicago was met with excitement, but also uncertainty. The Bulls were struggling, and their roster lacked the talent to compete with the league's elite teams. But Jordan immediately made an impact. In his rookie season, he averaged 28.2 points per game and was named NBA Rookie of the Year. His scoring ability was unparalleled, but it was his mentality that set him apart. Jordan wasn't content just being good, he was obsessed with being the best. His competitive nature pushed him to constantly improve, to refine every part of his game. From day one, it was clear that Jordan wasn't just another talented player, he was a force of nature. Despite his individual success, the Chicago Bulls were still far from championship contention. Jordan's brilliance was often overshadowed by the team's inability to perform in the postseason. He was carrying the team on his shoulders, but his supporting cast was not up to the challenge. This was a theme that would define the early years of Jordan's career. His desire to win was unmatched, but the pieces around him were often not capable of reaching the same heights. Jordan's early years in the league were also marked by his explosive athleticism. His leaping ability, speed, and agility made him a nightmare for defenders. He could seemingly glide through the air, dunking over players twice his size, and his skills on the court were often jaw-dropping. But what made Jordan truly special wasn't just his physical gifts, it was his mental toughness. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to dominate. Every opponent he faced, every team he played against, was another challenge to his ambition. This hunger for greatness would drive him for the rest of his career. The early 1990s were a period of growth for Jordan and the Bulls. Although the team had yet to break through in the playoffs, Jordan's influence on the league was growing. He became a global sensation, known not just for his basketball prowess but for his magnetic personality. His endorsements and commercials began to flood the airwaves, and soon, Jordan's name was synonymous with basketball itself. The media, which had once doubted his ability to lead a team, was now in awe of his charisma and skill. But despite his growing fame, Jordan was still frustrated with the lack of success in Chicago. The Bulls were not competing for championships, and Jordan knew that in order to reach his ultimate goal, changes had to be made. This led to the introduction of Phil Jackson, a coach with a unique approach to the game. Jackson's arrival in 1989 would be the turning point for the Bulls, and for Jordan. Jackson's triangle offense, designed to emphasize teamwork and ball movement, was a departure from the one-on-one style that had defined Jordan's early years in the league. Jackson saw something in Jordan that others didn't. He understood that Jordan's individual brilliance could be the cornerstone of a team-oriented system, but it would take trust, discipline, and sacrifice to make it work. Jackson's coaching philosophy was based on a spiritual balance, focusing on the mental aspects of the game as much as the physical ones. It was a radical approach, but it would ultimately bring the best out of Jordan, and the Bulls would soon become an unstoppable force. With Jackson as head coach, Jordan began to buy into the idea of teamwork. His game evolved. He became a more complete player, learning to trust his teammates, moving the ball more, and working within a system that allowed the Bulls to play as a cohesive unit. But this transformation didn't come easily. Jordan had spent years focusing on individual success, and it took time to embrace the idea that championships were won not just by the individual, but by the team as a whole. By 1991, the Bulls had put it all together. They reached the NBA Finals for the first time, and Jordan's leadership was key to their success. His performance in the finals against the Los Angeles Lakers was a defining moment in his career. He led the Bulls to a 4-1 victory, earning his first NBA championship and solidifying his place in basketball history. The moment was a culmination of everything Jordan had worked for: the tireless hours of training, the early years of disappointment, and the years of growth under Phil Jackson. Jordan's first championship was just the beginning. With Jackson's guidance and his own unrelenting drive, Jordan and the Bulls would go on to form one of the most dominant dynasties in NBA history. But as dominant as Jordan was on the court, his journey had only just begun. The real challenge, for him and for the Bulls, was to maintain that success year after year and to prove that their first championship was not a fluke, but the start of something truly special. The rise of Michael Jordan was not just a story of individual brilliance, it was a story of transformation, leadership, and the relentless pursuit of greatness. Michael Jordan's arrival in the NBA was met with great anticipation. After a stellar career at the University of North Carolina, where he had already achieved more than most college players ever dream of, Jordan was ready to make his mark on the professional basketball world. But the path to greatness would not be as simple as stepping into a spotlight. It would require him to confront challenges both personal and professional that would test his resolve and shape his legacy. Jordan was selected by the Chicago Bulls as the third overall pick in the 1984 NBA draft, joining a team that was struggling and in need of a leader. The Bulls had seen little success in their history, and Jordan was brought in to change that. The franchise was stuck in mediocrity, and even though they had drafted a future superstar, there was no guarantee that he could carry them to greatness. Jordan wasn't walking into a well-oiled machine. He was entering a team that had a long way to go before competing for championships. Jordan's rookie season began with excitement and high expectations, but he quickly realized that the NBA was a different beast than college basketball. The speed, strength, and skill of the players were on a different level, and Jordan found himself adapting to a much faster-paced game. He had the physical tools to succeed, but even someone with his talent needed time to adjust. His first few games were a whirlwind of adjustments, but Jordan's competitiveness and natural ability quickly shone through. Despite a rough transition into the league, Jordan's rookie season was nothing short of extraordinary. He averaged 28.2 points per game, earning NBA Rookie of the Year honors. His athleticism and scoring ability immediately set him apart. Jordan was not only a scorer, he was an offensive force who could attack the basket with ease and shoot from nearly anywhere on the floor. His speed and vertical leap allowed him to blow past defenders, and his ability to create shots for himself and his teammates was unparalleled. Yet, for all of his individual brilliance, the team wasn't able to translate that into wins. The Bulls still lacked the chemistry and support around him to make a real push for a championship. In his second season, Jordan's dominance continued. He averaged over 30 points per game and led the league in scoring, but the Bulls' struggles persisted. Despite his offensive brilliance, they were still failing to make a deep playoff run. Jordan was playing on a team that, for all its potential, was still not equipped to compete at the highest level. This became a familiar theme early in Jordan's career. His individual success was clear, but the team's lack of cohesion and depth kept them from achieving anything significant in the postseason. Every year, the expectations grew, and every year, the results remained the same. The Bulls could not get over the hump. This constant disappointment weighed heavily on Jordan. He was an athlete who demanded the best of himself, and it was clear that his individual brilliance was not enough to carry the team to championship contention. The frustration mounted with each early playoff exit, especially after Jordan's efforts were overshadowed by the collective failure of the team. He had already shown that he could play at an elite level, but he began to realize that talent alone wouldn't be enough to win a championship. He needed help, and more importantly, he needed a system that could support his skills. The turning point came in 1989 when the Bulls hired Phil Jackson as head coach. Jackson was not a conventional coach. He had a background in coaching teams with a unique approach to the game, influenced by his time with the New York Knicks and his exposure to Tex Winter's triangle offense. Jackson saw in Jordan not just a player with incredible skill, but someone who needed to be pushed and challenged in ways he had never been before. Jackson's arrival would change the trajectory of Jordan's career and ultimately the Chicago Bulls' fortunes. Jackson's philosophy was built on the idea that basketball was a game that needed to be played as a team, and that the best way to unlock a player's full potential was to help them play within a system. This system was the triangle offense, a style of play that focused on spacing, movement, and unselfish basketball. Jackson introduced Jordan to the concept of playing for the team rather than focusing solely on his own greatness. While this was a difficult transition for a player who had been used to carrying his team on his shoulders, Jackson helped Jordan understand that in order to win championships, he would need to trust his teammates and work together as a unit. For Jordan, buying into the system was not an easy adjustment. His natural instinct was to dominate the ball, score at will, and take over games. But Jackson helped him see that, with the right teammates and the right approach, the Bulls could achieve greater success than they ever had before. Jackson's mentorship was crucial in Jordan's evolution from a dominant individual player to the leader of a championship team. While Jordan's scoring ability remained his calling card, he learned to involve his teammates more, trust in their abilities, and recognize that the team's success was more important than his individual numbers. The results of this transformation were immediate. In 1991, the Chicago Bulls reached the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. They faced off against the Los Angeles Lakers, led by Magic Johnson, one of the greatest players to ever play the game. The Lakers were seasoned, confident, and battle-tested. But Jordan's intensity and focus were unmatched. The Bulls went on to win the series 4-1, with Jordan being named Finals MVP after averaging 31.2 points per game. This victory wasn't just about Jordan's personal success, it was about the realization that his unselfish play, coupled with Jackson's coaching, could turn the Bulls into an unstoppable force. Winning the 1991 championship marked the beginning of the Chicago Bulls dynasty. They went on to win 2 more championships in 1992 and 1993, cementing their place as the dominant team of the early 90s. Jordan was now a 3-time NBA champion, but even as the victories piled up, he knew that his journey was far from over. The pressure to maintain success was immense, and Jordan's competitive fire showed no signs of burning out. In fact, the deeper the Bulls went into the playoffs, the more Jordan embraced the challenge. Jordan's success on the court was matched only by his growing influence off the court. By this point, Jordan had become a global superstar. His Nike Air Jordan sneakers became one of the most successful and iconic shoe lines in history. His presence in commercials and endorsements turned him into a worldwide brand, making him one of the highest-paid athletes of his time. But it wasn't just about money. Jordan's brand transcended sports. It became a symbol of excellence and success. His reach extended far beyond basketball fans, touching all corners of popular culture. Despite all of this, Jordan remained focused on his ultimate goal, winning championships. Each year brought new challenges, and Jordan continued to meet those challenges head-on. His leadership and determination were key to the Bulls' success, and he continued to push himself and his teammates to be better. His mindset, focused solely on victory, made him an unparalleled competitor, and it was that very mentality that helped the Bulls secure their second three-peat in 1996, 1997, and 1998. As Jordan's legacy began to take shape, he solidified his place as not just a basketball player, but a symbol of greatness. His story was not just one of individual achievement, it was the story of overcoming adversity, building a team, and leading that team to sustained success. By the time the 1990s came to a close, Michael Jordan had become synonymous with winning, and his impact on the NBA and sports culture was undeniable. His rise from a young, driven college player to the undisputed greatest basketball player of all time was a testament to his work ethic, his leadership, and his unrelenting desire to be the best. But even as he reached the pinnacle of success, Jordan knew that the road ahead would never be easy. The pressure to maintain greatness would be constant, and the challenges would only become more difficult. What mattered now was how Jordan would respond to the pressure and what he would do to continue shaping his legacy. As Michael Jordan's career progressed, one thing became increasingly clear: his talent alone wasn't enough to bring the Chicago Bulls the championship they were desperate for. Despite his individual brilliance, there was a crucial barrier in Jordan's path, a team that embodied the grit and grind of championship-caliber basketball, the Detroit Pistons. Known as the Bad Boys, the Pistons were led by the fiery Isaiah Thomas and featured a team built on toughness, defense, and an unrelenting physical style of play. For Jordan and the Bulls, the Pistons were the ultimate obstacle in their quest for an NBA title. In the late 1980s, the Pistons had become the dominant force in the Eastern Conference. They had an aggressive, almost bullying defense, and they were led by a group of players who weren't afraid to use their physicality to wear down opponents. The Pistons had a clear formula for success: overpower their opponents, particularly the young stars like Jordan, who had yet to taste playoff glory. Jordan, despite his meteoric rise, was still unable to push his Bulls past the Pistons in the postseason. From 1987 to 1990, the Bulls and Pistons met in the playoffs every year, and each time, the Pistons emerged victorious. The series were physical, hard-fought battles that often ended with Jordan being beaten up and frustrated. Detroit's defensive strategy was built around shutting down Jordan. They would double-team him, knock him to the ground, and force him to take difficult shots. It was clear, the Pistons weren't just playing defense, they were trying to break Jordan mentally and physically. But in every loss, Jordan only grew more determined. The 1988 Eastern Conference Finals were particularly grueling. The Bulls were finally showing signs of becoming a legitimate contender, but the Pistons were in their prime, and their physical play seemed to be too much for Chicago to overcome. Jordan was exhausted by the end of the series, having fought off constant contact, fouls, and hard screens. The Pistons' strategy was simple: prevent Jordan from getting to the basket, force him into difficult jump shots, and make him feel every moment of contact. It worked. The Bulls fell to the Pistons in a decisive Game 6, and Chicago's hopes of making it to the finals were dashed once again. But that loss, while painful, was also a turning point for Jordan and the Bulls. It became clear to Jordan that individual brilliance alone wouldn't be enough to beat the Pistons. He was a scorer, an athlete, and a playmaker, but the Pistons had perfected the art of team defense, and it was evident that Jordan needed more than just his skills to succeed. He needed to evolve his game. The next few seasons saw Jordan become even more driven. He spent countless hours in the gym, strengthening his body to endure the physical punishment the Pistons dished out. His ability to absorb contact, finish through defenders, and maintain his composure under pressure would become crucial in the years to come. But perhaps the biggest change for Jordan was his mental approach to the game. In previous years, his frustration with the Pistons' physicality had often caused him to force shots or try to play hero ball. He realized that, to beat Detroit, he needed to play smarter, not just harder. In the 1990-1991 season, the Bulls were finally ready. They had improved as a team, and Jordan's development as a leader had come full circle. Scottie Pippen had blossomed into one of the league's best players, and the Bulls were now a well-rounded unit. Under new head coach Phil Jackson, the team embraced the triangle offense, a system that emphasized unselfish ball movement, spacing, and teamwork. This was a significant shift for Jordan, who had long been accustomed to carrying the load himself. But with Jackson's leadership and Pippen's emergence as a legitimate co-star, Jordan was finally able to see the bigger picture. To beat the Pistons, they would need to play as a team, not just rely on his individual brilliance. The 1991 Eastern Conference Finals were set to be the ultimate test for Jordan and the Bulls. They faced the Pistons for the fourth consecutive year, but this time, the circumstances were different. The Pistons, although still dominant, were beginning to show signs of age. The core of the team, including Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer, had been through numerous battles and were not the same force they had been in previous seasons. For the first time, the Bulls were the favorites. The series began in Detroit, where the Pistons, as always, tried to impose their physical style of play. But Jordan was ready. The Bulls were no longer a one-man show. With Pippen and a stronger supporting cast, they were able to fight back. Jordan's play was still the centerpiece, but his ability to trust his teammates was crucial. In Game 1, Jordan delivered a statement performance, leading the Bulls to a narrow victory. But the Pistons weren't ready to give up their throne so easily. Detroit came back strong in Game 2, but the Bulls were relentless. Game 3 in Chicago was a defining moment, as Jordan's leadership, combined with the team's defense and ball movement, overwhelmed the Pistons. Jordan's ability to remain calm and execute in clutch moments, traits that would become his trademark, was on full display. By Game 4, the Bulls were on the brink of eliminating the Pistons and reaching the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. But the most iconic moment of the series came at the end of Game 4, when the Pistons, defeated and frustrated, chose to walk off the court early. They refused to shake hands with the Bulls, a moment that symbolized the end of an era in the NBA. The Bulls had finally overcome the Pistons' reign of dominance, and Jordan had proven that he could not only compete at the highest level but also lead his team to victory in the face of adversity. The moment was both a victory for Jordan and a passing of the torch in the Eastern Conference. The Bulls went on to face the Los Angeles Lakers in the 1991 NBA Finals, and the rest, as they say, is history. Jordan led the Bulls to a 4-1 victory, capturing his first NBA championship. He was named Finals MVP, and the basketball world was introduced to a new era of dominance. But it was Jordan's mental and physical growth that made the victory so sweet. He had finally figured out the key to success. He didn't need to do it alone. He could rely on his teammates, play smarter, and trust the system. The Bulls had not only overcome the Pistons, but they had also risen to the challenge of becoming a championship-caliber team. That victory over the Pistons would forever be remembered as the turning point in Jordan's career. It was the moment when he proved to the world that he could not only dominate as an individual but also lead a team to the promised land. The rivalry between Jordan and the Pistons was over, but the lessons learned from those battles would stay with him forever, shaping him into the player who would go on to win 6 NBA championships and become the greatest basketball player the world had ever seen. In 1991, after years of struggle and heartbreak, Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls finally reached the pinnacle of the NBA. The victory over the Detroit Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals had been a defining moment in their journey, but it was the following year that would cement their place in NBA history. The Chicago Bulls were not just on the verge of greatness, they were about to build one of the greatest dynasties the sport had ever seen. After finally overcoming the Pistons, the Bulls entered the 1991 NBA Finals with a new sense of purpose. They faced the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that had dominated the league in the 1980s with the legendary Magic Johnson leading the way. But the Lakers were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. Magic Johnson was still playing at a high level, but the Lakers had begun to age, and their dominance in the league was beginning to fade. For the Bulls, this was their chance to prove that they were more than just a team full of promise. This was Michael Jordan's time to show that he could lead his team to the top and that the Bulls were a force to be reckoned with. The series was expected to be a tough one, but no one anticipated the level of dominance that the Bulls would display. In Game 1, Jordan was at his absolute best. His scoring ability was on full display, but it was his leadership that made the biggest impact. Jordan controlled the game, both offensively and defensively, and showed his ability to elevate his teammates. His performance was a statement, a declaration that he was ready to take his place among the greats of the game. The Bulls won the game comfortably, and it became clear that they were not just another up-and-coming team, they were contenders. The final series continued with the Bulls dominating the Lakers in a way that few expected. Jordan was simply too much for the Lakers to handle. He scored with ease, hit clutch shots, and delivered when the pressure was at its highest. The Bulls' defense, led by Scottie Pippen, was stifling. The Lakers couldn't find a way to stop Jordan, and the Bulls swept the series 4-1. It was a resounding victory, and Michael Jordan had officially captured his first NBA championship. But this was just the beginning. The victory over the Lakers marked the start of the Bulls dynasty, one that would go on to dominate the NBA for the next decade. Jordan's first championship was a landmark moment in his career, but he knew that the true test would be whether the Bulls could sustain this success over multiple seasons. This was a team, not just a one-man show, and the next challenge was to prove that their dominance wasn't a fluke. Over the next few years, the Bulls would build on their success. The team was no longer just Jordan's team, it was a well-rounded squad with talent at every position. Scottie Pippen, who had emerged as one of the league's best players, became Jordan's right-hand man. The two developed a chemistry on the court that would become the hallmark of the Bulls' success. Pippen was the perfect complement to Jordan, a versatile defender and playmaker who could contribute in all areas of the game. His ability to defend the best player on the opposing team and still score efficiently made him one of the league's most underrated superstars. The Bulls also found crucial support in players like Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, and Ron Harper. Each player brought something unique to the table, whether it was Kukoc's versatility, Kerr's sharpshooting, or Harper's defensive ability. These role players allowed Jordan and Pippen to focus on what they did best while still maintaining a well-balanced team. This depth, combined with Phil Jackson's coaching, made the Bulls nearly unbeatable. In 1992, the Bulls returned to the NBA Finals, facing the Portland Trail Blazers. The Blazers were a talented team, with players like Clyde Drexler and Terry Porter, but they were no match for the Bulls' all-around dominance. Jordan was simply unstoppable. His scoring ability in the finals was otherworldly, but what stood out most was his iconic performance in Game 1. Jordan hit 6 three-pointers in the first half, something that was almost unheard of for him at the time. His performance sent a message to the rest of the league. The Bulls were no longer just a team to watch, they were the team to beat. The Bulls would go on to win the series 4-2, securing their second consecutive championship. Jordan was once again named Finals MVP, and his status as the best player in the world was now indisputable. The victory in 1992 was a key moment in the Bulls dynasty, but it was the way they won, through teamwork, resilience, and the leadership of Jordan, that solidified their place as one of the greatest teams in NBA history. The 1993 season saw the Bulls push their dominance even further. The team won 57 games in the regular season, and Jordan, Pippen, and the rest of the team were firing on all cylinders. They went into the playoffs as heavy favorites and faced the Phoenix Suns in the finals. The Suns, led by Charles Barkley, were no slouches, but they were no match for the Bulls' all-around excellence. The series stretched to 6 games, but once again, Jordan and the Bulls were victorious. In Game 6, with the series on the line, Jordan delivered one of his most iconic performances. With the Bulls leading by just 1 point late in the game, Jordan hit a clutch jumper over Suns defender Dan Majerle to give the Bulls a 3-point lead. The shot, known as the shot, became one of the most memorable moments in NBA history. The Bulls held on to win the game and the series, capturing their third consecutive title and completing their first three-peat. Jordan was named Finals MVP once again, cementing his place as the greatest player in the world. But while the accolades piled up, Jordan knew that there was more work to be done. The Bulls had built something special, but Jordan's hunger for more titles was insatiable. The pressure to maintain that level of success was immense, but Jordan embraced the challenge. He continued to push himself, and the team, to new heights, knowing that the only way to remain the best was to keep improving. In the summer of 1993, as the Bulls celebrated their third consecutive championship, Jordan made the unexpected decision to retire from basketball. The announcement sent shockwaves through the sports world. Jordan, at the height of his career, was stepping away from the game he had dominated for nearly a decade. The reasons behind his decision were complicated. Jordan was exhausted, both physically and mentally, after the grueling seasons and the toll of the media spotlight. He also cited his father's death, which had occurred 2 years earlier, as a major factor in his decision to retire. Jordan's retirement left a hole in the NBA that was impossible to fill. The Chicago Bulls had lost their leader, and the league had lost its brightest star. But Jordan's absence didn't last long. In March of 1995, Jordan made his iconic return to the NBA, sending shockwaves through the sports world once again. He would soon prove that his first retirement was not the end of his story, it was simply the beginning of the next chapter in his legendary career. The Chicago Bulls dynasty had been built, not just on Jordan's talent, but on teamwork, resilience, and an unrelenting drive to be the best. The first three-peat was a testament to what could be achieved when the right pieces came together, but the best was still to come. Jordan's return would mark the beginning of another chapter in the Bulls dynasty, and the challenges ahead would be even greater than those the team had already conquered. The quest for greatness never ends. The 1993 NBA season ended on a high for Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. For the third consecutive year, Jordan led the Bulls to an NBA championship, and the team had completed an unparalleled run of dominance. It was a historic achievement, one that would etch Jordan's name deeper into the fabric of basketball history. Jordan was at the peak of his career, unquestionably the best player in the world, and the future looked as bright as ever. But in the midst of this success, Jordan was facing a series of personal struggles that would soon force him to step away from the game he loved. The catalyst for Jordan's first retirement was the tragic and untimely death of his father, James Jordan. James had been Michael's biggest supporter throughout his entire life, from his early years in Wilmington, North Carolina, to his rise to NBA stardom. Their bond was unbreakable. James had always been there, cheering from the sidelines, offering words of encouragement, and pushing Michael to be the best version of himself. His death, in 1993, was devastating, and the loss shook Jordan to his core. James Jordan was murdered in July of 1993 during a robbery while he was driving home from a funeral. The senseless nature of the crime, his father being taken from him so suddenly, left Michael with a feeling of emptiness and grief that he could not shake. For someone who had always relied on his father's presence as a source of strength and guidance, losing him was a blow that would prove to be more than just personal, it would be deeply emotional and career-altering. At the time, Jordan tried to focus on basketball, channeling his grief into his play. He continued his reign as the best player in the NBA, winning the 1993 MVP award and leading the Bulls through another successful season. However, Jordan's heart was no longer in the game. His father's death created a void that basketball could not fill, and soon, it became apparent that the weight of the loss was affecting him on and off the court. The immense pressure of carrying the expectations of an entire franchise, while dealing with personal grief, began to take a toll on his mental and emotional well-being. The 1993 NBA Finals, in which the Bulls defeated the Phoenix Suns to win their third consecutive title, would prove to be Jordan's last as a player for several years. After the victory, Jordan took some time to reflect on his future. Although he had just reached the pinnacle of success, he could no longer ignore the emotional pain that consumed him. The constant media attention and the expectation to maintain an undefeated status weighed heavily on him. Jordan had already been through so much, and the mental toll of being Michael Jordan, the iconic superstar who could never show weakness, was becoming overwhelming. In the fall of 1993, Jordan made the unexpected decision to retire from basketball. He shocked the world by announcing that he was stepping away from the NBA, at the peak of his powers. At just 30 years old, Jordan was in the prime of his career and had just won 3 consecutive championships with the Bulls. Yet, he could not shake the feeling that something was missing in his life. For Jordan, the emotional weight of his father's death and the relentless pressure to continue winning championships was simply too much. Jordan's decision to retire at such a young age was unprecedented. He had everything, fame, fortune, and the world at his feet. But in his eyes, nothing could replace the loss of his father. His desire to step away from basketball was not a reflection of his lack of love for the game, but rather his need to find something more in his life. Jordan had already accomplished everything an athlete could dream of. He was a 3-time NBA champion, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, and had countless accolades to his name. But the death of his father forced him to re-examine what truly mattered to him. At the time of his retirement, Jordan's absence from the NBA was deeply felt. His talent and leadership had turned the Bulls into a dynasty, and his departure left a void in the league. The NBA's landscape, once shaped by his dominance, now had to figure out how to survive without its biggest star. The league had grown globally because of Jordan's influence, and his absence raised concerns about the future of the NBA. In retirement, Jordan decided to pursue something entirely different: baseball. A sport that his father had loved and supported him in as a child seemed like a natural choice. Jordan signed a minor league contract with the Chicago White Sox in February of 1994, and he made the move to the Birmingham Barons, a Double-A affiliate. His time away from basketball allowed him to heal emotionally, but it also gave him the space to pursue his father's dream for him to be a baseball player. Jordan's baseball career was not a success story by the standards of professional athletes. He struggled with hitting and his performance was inconsistent, but it was clear that his work ethic and determination were evident even in the face of difficulty. He hit .202 with 3 home runs and 51 RBIs in 127 games with the Barons, far from the star player many had expected him to be. Despite these struggles, Jordan's commitment to improving his game was unwavering, and his time in baseball allowed him to focus on something outside of the pressures of the NBA. But even as Jordan pursued baseball, it was clear that basketball had not truly left his heart. His time away from the NBA had given him perspective, but it also reignited his love for the game. Jordan would spend his off-seasons practicing basketball, working on his game, and staying connected with his former teammates. His drive and competitiveness were undeniable, and he knew deep down that his place was still on the basketball court. In March 1995, after just over a year and a half away from the NBA, Jordan made his long-anticipated return to the game. He issued a brief, iconic statement to the media: "I'm back." The news sent shockwaves through the sports world. The Chicago Bulls, who had continued to compete at a high level in Jordan's absence, were now poised to reunite with their star player. But questions loomed: would Jordan still have the same impact after a long break from competitive basketball? Could he return to the form that had made him the best player in the world? Jordan's return was met with a mixture of excitement, skepticism, and curiosity. His return to the NBA wouldn't just be about his comeback story, it would also be about proving that he could still perform at the highest level. As the 1995 playoffs began, Jordan's arrival was both an emotional and physical challenge. But he quickly showed that he hadn't lost a step, scoring 55 points in a game against the New York Knicks in his first few weeks back. By the end of the season, Jordan was back in full form, ready to lead the Bulls on another championship run. While Jordan's first retirement was marked by personal loss, it would also become a defining part of his legacy. The decision to step away from basketball showed the world that even the greatest of all time had human struggles and vulnerabilities. It was a decision that made him not just a player people admired, but someone who could be understood and respected on a deeper level. When Jordan returned to the NBA, he was no longer just a basketball machine that had dominated the league. He was a man who had faced personal hardship, grown stronger from it, and was now ready to reclaim his place as the best in the world. His journey was far from over, but the lessons learned from his time away would help define the rest of his incredible career. When Michael Jordan returned to the NBA in 1995, it felt like the world had been waiting for his arrival. The Chicago Bulls, who had continued to succeed without him, were now ready to take their place at the top of the basketball world once again. Yet, Jordan's return was not a mere re-entry into the game. He was walking back into a league that had evolved during his time away. The competition was fierce, the players more confident, and the league itself had changed. But despite all these changes, one thing remained certain: Michael Jordan was still the player everyone feared. Jordan's return was a dramatic moment. After a brief foray into baseball following the death of his father, he announced to the world, simply, "I'm back." It was a moment that caught the attention of not only the NBA but the entire sports world. Jordan's decision to retire had shocked the basketball community, and his return was just as startling. The question now wasn't whether Jordan was still talented, no one doubted that, but whether he could lead the Bulls back to the top of the NBA mountain after such a long absence. The Bulls, who had been thriving under head coach Phil Jackson's leadership, had gone 47-35 in Jordan's absence, but there was a sense that something was missing. They had made the playoffs without Jordan, but the team wasn't quite the powerhouse it had been during their 3 consecutive championship wins. Scottie Pippen had become the focal point, but without Jordan's scoring ability and leadership, the team lacked that definitive edge. The return of Jordan, however, would change everything. Jordan's transition back to basketball wasn't without its challenges. He wasn't immediately the player he had been in 1993. His return to the court was met with some rust. He wasn't playing the same level of basketball as before. Yet, even in his early games back, Jordan proved his value. He was still the best player on the floor, and even though he didn't play with the same dominant force he once did, his leadership, his ability to elevate his teammates, and his drive to succeed were all clearly evident. The Bulls began to gel again, and the winning habits that defined their dynasty started to return. The 1995 playoffs came around, and Jordan had to fight his way back into form. The road to another championship would not be easy. The Bulls faced off against the Charlotte Hornets in the first round of the playoffs. Jordan was already showing signs of his previous dominance, including a memorable 55-point performance against the New York Knicks, but it was clear that the journey back would take some time. The Hornets put up a tough fight, and the series went to a Game 7. But in the end, Jordan's experience, his leadership, and his mental toughness helped the Bulls close out the series. The Bulls were back on track. As the postseason progressed, the competition became fiercer. The Bulls faced the Orlando Magic in the Eastern Conference semifinals. The Magic, led by Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway, were one of the most talented teams in the league, but the Bulls' championship pedigree and Jordan's return gave them the edge. However, the series was a stark reminder of how much Jordan had missed. The Magic, under coach Brian Hill, managed to defeat the Bulls in 6 games, in a shocking upset that sent ripples throughout the league. This loss to the Magic in 1995 was a bitter pill for Jordan. It was the first time in his career that he was truly knocked out of the postseason in his prime, and it stung. Jordan had returned to win a 4th NBA championship, but his first year back had ended in disappointment. Yet, it was in this setback that Jordan learned something vital. He wasn't invincible. The game had changed in his absence, and it would take more than just his individual brilliance to return the Bulls to glory. That offseason, Jordan and the Bulls made adjustments. Jordan's work ethic became the focal point of the team's approach. The addition of key players like Steve Kerr and Tony Kukoc provided the necessary support for the team, while Jackson's leadership continued to guide the group. But the most important factor was Jordan himself. He was not content with just being good, he wanted to be great, and he wanted to lead his team back to the top. He pushed himself and his teammates to new levels of excellence. The 1996 season would mark the beginning of the second phase of the Chicago Bulls dynasty, and Jordan would lead them to one of the most dominant seasons in NBA history. With Jordan fully back to form, the Bulls finished with a record of 72-10, setting an NBA record for regular season wins. This was a team on a mission, and Jordan was the undisputed leader. His scoring, defense, and leadership skills were at their peak, and the Bulls were firing on all cylinders. Throughout the regular season, Jordan showed that not only had he regained his former brilliance, but he had also become a more complete player. He was not just a scorer, he was now a more consistent passer and an even more determined defender. His relationship with Pippen, once a secondary partnership, had now become the centerpiece of one of the most dangerous duos in NBA history. Pippen's ability to guard the opposing team's best player while contributing offensively made the Bulls' defense one of the most feared in the league. The 1996 NBA Finals would prove to be the ultimate test for the revamped Bulls. They faced the Seattle Supersonics, a team led by Shawn Kemp and Gary Payton, who had been one of the best in the West that season. The Supersonics were tough and well-coached, but they were no match for Jordan and the Bulls. The series was hard-fought, but Chicago proved too dominant. The Bulls won the Finals 4-2, and Jordan was named Finals MVP for the fourth time in his career. Jordan's performance in the Finals was nothing short of spectacular. He averaged 27.3 points per game and showed the world that despite a brief absence from the game, he was still the best player on the planet. His leadership was evident not only in his scoring but in his ability to control the tempo of the game, make clutch plays when necessary, and elevate his teammates. This victory didn't just secure another championship for Jordan and the Bulls, it proved that they were back, and this time, they weren't going anywhere. The Bulls were now a dynasty once again, and Jordan was at the center of it all. The success of the 1996 season was a testament to the hard work and perseverance of both the team and their leader. Jordan had shown that he could come back after a setback and still reach the heights of his former greatness. But it was also clear that the Bulls' success was built on more than just Jordan's individual brilliance. It was built on the teamwork, strategy, and leadership that Phil Jackson had cultivated over the years. With the 1996 championship in hand, Jordan had proven that his return to the NBA was not just about him. He had come back to prove that the Chicago Bulls were still the best team in basketball, and that his place in history as the greatest player of all time was secure. The road to the second three-peat was paved, and with each new victory, Jordan's legacy grew even stronger. As the years progressed, Jordan would continue to lead the Bulls to even greater heights, and his influence would extend beyond the basketball court. His second three-peat, along with the dominance of the team and the unprecedented success they achieved together, would define a new era in the NBA. Jordan's return had proven that greatness could never be taken for granted, it had to be earned, over and over again. The Chicago Bulls had returned to the top, and Michael Jordan had once again proven that, when it came to winning championships, he was second to none. The moment Michael Jordan walked away from the NBA in 1993, it marked a drastic shift in not just his career, but the entire basketball landscape. His sudden retirement after 3 straight NBA championships was a personal decision made after the death of his father. It was a time for Jordan to step away from the game that had consumed so much of his life and focus on the things that truly mattered. But Jordan's absence left a huge gap in the Chicago Bulls roster, and the franchise was left wondering how they could fill the void left by their greatest player. When Jordan returned in 1995, he was stepping back into a league that had continued to evolve in his absence. The competition had grown more formidable, the talent more refined. And while the Bulls had stayed competitive under coach Phil Jackson, there was no replacing Michael Jordan. His return was met with excitement, but also with high expectations. Could he still perform at the elite level he had set for himself before he left? Jordan's comeback wasn't just about returning to play basketball, it was about reclaiming his legacy, proving to the world, and to himself, that his success had not been a fluke. His return came at a time when the Bulls were still trying to establish their place as a true dynasty without him, and they were hoping that his presence would bring them back to the pinnacle of the NBA. As the 1995-1996 season unfolded, Jordan proved that his game hadn't lost its edge. He was still capable of putting up incredible numbers, leading the Bulls to an NBA best 72-10 record. However, for all of the success the Bulls were experiencing, the tensions within the organization were becoming harder to ignore. While Jordan's performance on the court was as dominant as ever, the internal conflicts within the Bulls front office, particularly with general manager Jerry Krause, began to overshadow the team's accomplishments. Krause was a key figure in the Bulls' rise to prominence, but his relationship with head coach Phil Jackson was increasingly strained. Jackson's contract was set to expire at the end of the 1997-1998 season, and Krause had already made it clear that he would not be renewing it, regardless of whether the Bulls won the championship. This decision caused a rift within the team, and the players began to feel that they were caught in the middle of a power struggle. Jackson's leadership had been instrumental in the Bulls' success, and his looming departure was unsettling for everyone involved. Even Jordan, who had experienced great success under Jackson's tutelage, felt that the organization's focus had shifted from winning championships to internal politics. The Bulls were winning, but they weren't winning without cost. The team's unity was beginning to fray. The players had grown accustomed to the stability of Jackson's leadership, but with the realization that he would not return after the season, there was a sense of uncertainty that lingered over the team. The situation was made worse by the fact that Krause seemed more interested in maintaining his power within the organization than in ensuring the success of the team. His public statements and decisions, particularly regarding Jackson's future, caused unnecessary tension. This was not the environment that Jordan, Pippen, and the rest of the team had become accustomed to. Yet, despite the off-court distractions, the Bulls were still a formidable force. The 1997-1998 season saw Jordan lead the team to yet another championship, securing their sixth NBA title. But the success came with a sense of finality, as Jordan and Pippen were both coming to terms with the fact that the end of the dynasty was near. Jackson's looming departure, the tensions with Krause, and the sense that the Bulls had accomplished everything they set out to do all added to the feeling that this was the final act of an era. By the time the NBA Finals came around, the pressure was immense. Jordan and the Bulls faced off against the Utah Jazz, who had been one of the top teams in the league that season. The series was hard-fought, but Jordan's leadership and determination were too much for the Jazz to handle. In Game 6, with the Bulls leading by 1 point and the clock winding down, Jordan hit a jump shot over Brian Russell to give the Bulls the lead and secure their sixth NBA championship. The shot, known as the last shot, was the perfect conclusion to Jordan's career with the Bulls. But what followed was a moment of profound disappointment. Despite their triumph, Jordan, Pippen, and the rest of the Bulls knew that the organization was not united. The success they had achieved was overshadowed by the dysfunction within the front office. The team had fought for every victory, but the cracks in the foundation were becoming impossible to ignore. The internal power struggle had taken its toll, and Jordan, Pippen, and others felt betrayed by Krause's actions. Krause's decision to push for Jackson's departure, regardless of the team's success, was the final straw. Jordan had always been a player who demanded excellence from his teammates and himself, but he couldn't ignore the fact that the front office was undermining everything they had worked for. Jackson's dismissal was more than just a professional disagreement, it felt like a betrayal. Jackson had been integral to the Bulls' success, and his departure marked the end of an era. Jordan's frustration boiled over, and he made it clear that, for him, the future of the team was no longer a priority. He had already accomplished everything he set out to do, and with the end of the dynasty in sight, he couldn't bring himself to continue under the current leadership. Jordan's feelings of betrayal were amplified by the realization that his time with the Bulls might be over. He had been the centerpiece of their success for nearly a decade, but the future of the team seemed uncertain. After the finals, Jordan officially announced that he would retire from basketball once again, this time for good. The combination of internal turmoil and the completion of his goals in the NBA led him to believe that it was time to step away from the game for good. The dynasty that he and his teammates had built had come to an end, not because of failure, but because of an internal power struggle that left Jordan feeling like he had been betrayed by the very organization that he had helped lead to greatness. Jordan's second retirement came at a time when his legacy was already secure. He had won 6 NBA championships, 5 MVP awards, and countless other accolades. But the way the Bulls dynasty ended left a bitter taste in his mouth. The sense of unfinished business lingered. Jordan, always motivated by competition and the desire to prove himself, was not ready to leave the game on these terms. Yet, despite his emotional ties to the Bulls, the decision was made. He stepped away from the game once again, leaving behind a legacy that would be nearly impossible to replicate. The aftermath of Jordan's retirement saw the Bulls slowly decline. Without Jackson at the helm and without the leadership of Jordan, the team struggled to maintain the same level of success. The franchise went through a rebuilding phase, and the Bulls found themselves in a transition period. The internal strife within the organization, fueled by Krause's actions, contributed to the team's eventual collapse. For Jordan, though, the pain of the betrayal lingered. He had given everything to the Bulls, but in the end, his love for the game wasn't enough to overcome the politics that were tearing the team apart. Jordan's departure marked the end of the most successful era in the history of the Chicago Bulls, but it was also the beginning of a new chapter for him. After a brief retirement, Jordan would return to the NBA once more, this time with the Washington Wizards. But that chapter, while intriguing, would never come close to the dominance that Jordan had achieved with the Bulls. His time in Washington would serve as a footnote to his legendary career, but the true legacy of Michael Jordan had already been written. The betrayal from within the Bulls front office would be a defining moment in the story of his career, but it would not overshadow the greatness he had achieved. In the end, Jordan's legacy remains untarnished by the internal strife that marred the final years of his time with the Bulls. His success on the court, his leadership, and his determination to be the best will forever define his place in basketball history. When Michael Jordan retired for the second time after the 1997 to 1998 NBA season, it marked the end of an era. The Chicago Bulls had just won their sixth NBA championship in 8 years, and Jordan had cemented his place as the greatest basketball player the world had ever seen. But while his success on the court was unquestionable, it was the personal journey, full of triumphs, struggles, comebacks, and deep emotional battles, that truly defined Michael Jordan's legacy. The world had watched him grow, not just as an athlete, but as a leader, a competitor, and an icon. As the final buzzer sounded in the 1998 Finals, with Jordan hitting the game-winning shot against the Utah Jazz, it wasn't just a moment of victory. It was the culmination of a career that had transcended the sport of basketball. The emotional weight of his final championship with the Bulls was not lost on him, his teammates, or the millions who had followed his journey. But while the title was a fitting end, the circumstances surrounding it left Jordan with more than just satisfaction. They left him with a sense of something incomplete. His bond with the Bulls had been undeniable, but the politics within the team and his fractured relationship with the front office left a bitterness that would linger for years. Jordan's retirement came at a time when the NBA was changing. New stars were emerging, and the game was evolving. But no one could replace Michael Jordan. He had been more than just a basketball player, he was a global ambassador for the sport. The Jordan brand, his iconic Air Jordan sneakers, and his influence on pop culture had made him a household name far beyond the basketball court. He was a symbol of excellence, a standard for what it meant to work relentlessly toward perfection. He inspired a generation of players, from Kobe Bryant to LeBron James, and his impact on the game and beyond could never be overstated. After his retirement, Jordan spent time away from basketball. He briefly dabbled in baseball, following in his father's footsteps, and then shifted his focus to ownership and leadership. Jordan became the majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets in 2010, cementing his place as a trailblazer not just on the court but in the business world. But even in his post-playing days, the influence of Michael Jordan remained ever-present. His brand continued to dominate the sneaker market, and his legacy shaped the direction of the NBA in ways that few could have predicted. In 2003, Jordan made the surprising decision to return to the NBA once again, this time with the Washington Wizards. It was a much-anticipated and scrutinized comeback, and many wondered whether he could still play at the level he had reached during his prime. Jordan, now in his late 30s, wasn't the same explosive force he had been with the Bulls. However, he still proved to be a capable player, averaging over 20 points per game and providing leadership and mentorship to the younger players on the Wizards. His time with the Wizards was far from the glory years with the Bulls, but it showed that his love for the game had never truly faded. Even in his final years, Jordan continued to push himself to be the best, to prove that greatness didn't have an expiration date. Despite the resurgence in popularity that his second comeback brought, Jordan's final years in Washington were not as satisfying as his earlier championships. His performance, while impressive for someone of his age, couldn't replicate the dominance he had once displayed. But this second stint in the NBA was not about adding more titles to his name. It was about proving that his legacy was about more than just winning. It was about the impact he had made on the game and the way he had changed the sport forever. Jordan's eventual retirement in 2003 marked the final chapter of his playing career, but his influence on the game was far from over. The NBA, once defined by the likes of Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, had been reshaped by Michael Jordan. His relentless drive, his competitive spirit, and his ability to perform when the stakes were highest set the standard for every player who came after him. The league, and the world, would forever be in his debt for the way he elevated the game, making it not just a sport, but a global spectacle. The true measure of Jordan's legacy is not just the championships, the MVPs, or the countless accolades he accumulated. It's the way he changed the very culture of basketball. His brand, his influence, and his standard of excellence have become benchmarks for every player who comes after him. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, and countless others grew up idolizing Jordan, trying to emulate his success and work ethic. His impact extended beyond the game of basketball into fashion, business, and entertainment, making him one of the most recognizable figures in the world. But it was his influence on the players who followed that truly defined his legacy. Players who wanted to be like Mike, not just because of his skill, but because of his mental toughness and his unrelenting pursuit of greatness. Jordan's example set the tone for how future generations of athletes would approach their craft. He taught them that success wasn't given, it was earned, through hard work, sacrifice, and a relentless will to win. Jordan's time with the Bulls will forever be remembered as the greatest dynasty in NBA history. The 6 championships, the iconic shots, the battles against the toughest opponents, each moment has become part of basketball lore. But the story of Michael Jordan is also one of overcoming obstacles, of pushing through setbacks, of adapting and evolving over the course of a legendary career. He wasn't perfect, but it was his imperfections, his struggles, and his ability to learn from them that made him a true champion. The NBA was never the same after Jordan's first retirement in 1993. It changed when he returned, and it changed again when he retired for good. His impact on the game cannot be overstated. He didn't just play basketball, he redefined it. Jordan was more than just an athlete. He was an icon, a cultural force who transcended sports and became a symbol of excellence and determination. As the years go by, Michael Jordan's legacy only grows stronger. He remains a figure of inspiration for athletes worldwide, and his influence continues to shape the future of basketball. The story of Michael Jordan is one of greatness, but it's also a story of humanity, a story of triumph, failure, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. His legacy is not just written in the trophies he won or the records he broke, but in the lives he touched and the standard he set for what it means to be the best. Jordan may have retired, but his impact on the game, on sports, and on the world will last forever. He changed basketball, and in doing so, he changed the way the world looked at athletes and what it means to be truly great. The legend of Michael Jordan will live on, not just in the records he set, but in the hearts of those who were inspired by his story. It's a legacy that will never fade, a testament to what is possible when one man, driven by an insatiable desire to be the best, rises above and leaves a mark on the world.